Hey guys, before I start, I just wanted to thank you guys for watching my videos. If you enjoy this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really means more than you know, and it allows me to continue to make these tutorials just for you guys. So thanks again. I wanted to create a beginner-friendly introduction to Nomad Sculpt. I saw this request a lot, and I understand a lot of you guys are new to the program and have no idea where to start. So I'm hoping that this tutorial will get you guys in a place where you can at least jump in confidently and just start to play with the program. So yeah, let's just dive right into this. Okay, so right off the bat, you can use your finger to move around the scene. Same thing with your stylus. And you can use this cube in the right hand corner to help you know what direction the camera is facing. You can also click it to focus on a specific direction that you want the camera to focus on. This little icon that is right on top of it will frame the whatever you have selected in your screen. So if you had more than one shape, if you hit this, it'll frame that object. You also have this little home icon underneath that, which is just going to reset the view to the default camera. And then over on the left side, if we come down here, you're going to have a gizmo tool, and that's basically going to allow you to move, rotate, scale your object. So these are just the handles for the object. The outermost little icons are going to be your scale tools, and then they're going to scale according to the axes they are sitting on. So if we go to the top, this is their Z scale, this is your X, and this is your Y scale, and then this one will just do kind of simultaneously all of them. Then you have your arrows, which you can, again, they are just your move. And then the inner ring will allow you to rotate along each axis. And then you can actually double tap with 2 fingers to undo. And then let's just go back to get our sphere to the beginning. Okay, and then above our gizmo tool here in this left hand menu, we have our mask tool. Now I won't go into too much depth about the mask tool because there are a lot of settings and it could be used in many different ways, but the overall idea is that you can use mask to either protect an area that you don't want to alter, or the opposite, which would be to isolate an area that you specifically want to work on. So in this case, you saw I used the mask tool to draw my shape, and then if I tap with 1 finger, it's going to invert my mask. Up here we have our mask settings, and you can do the same thing. You can invert, you can blur the mask a little bit, you can sharpen it, or you can clear your mask. I'm going to double tap to bring that back. And that's pretty much, you know, the point of a mask. Like I said, you want to isolate something or you want to protect a specific area. Once you're done, you can just clear the mask out. Then above the masking tool, you have your smooth tool, which is just a shortcut for your smooth brush. And they're going to do the same thing. This is just kind of like a quick access tool. We're going to be smoothing a lot as we sculpt and we want to bring down some geometry. We will use the smooth tool. I don't really use the relax tool a whole lot, but it's similar to the smooth tool, except it, instead of smoothing the overall area, it's going to focus on relaxing the wireframe, which we'll get into a little bit. But if you look at this menu down here, you see the option for wireframe. This is pretty much showing you what is actually going on underneath your sculpt, your clay. It is made out of all of these little polygon shapes, and that is known as your topology. So when we use the relax tool, it's going to focus on relaxing this wireframe rather than smoothing out your clay, if that makes any sense. Again, I don't really use this a whole lot. Okay, so this is the default sphere that comes with Nomad when you start your project, but I'm going to get rid of it. And in order to do that, you can see up here in our left hand menu at the top corner, we have our little folder, and this one will actually bring up all of your file options. So you could either save as, rename the file. You can open up a different file if you want to work on a different project. You can also import one of your existing projects into the current scene. You could delete a project, or you could just create a new file. Here we just have other export options, but we're not going to go into that. And then in the next little tool menu here, we have our scene. Basically, this is our scene layout, and under that we have options of adding in other geometry. So you can add another sphere. Now it added it directly in the center of our scene, which is why we're not seeing the difference. So I can just grab my gizmo tool down here and move the new sphere that I just added to the left, and that way you can see there are two. And if I click on each, you'll see it turn that kind of purple color. That means that is the one that's selected. And then again, if we open up our scene, we could just do the same thing here by clicking each. We could also delete, and I'm gonna just delete that original sphere that came into the scene, and I'll tell you why. So as you can see, this sphere, they look different on the menu here, and when I click on them, this one has this little tool set up here. So what that means is that this sphere that comes ready to go when you start a new project is ready to be sculpted on. And then this one that you add as a primitive tool is not ready to be sculpted on. That one hasn't been validated yet. You have to validate if you want to sculpt. Now the point of this is that you want a primitive that hasn't been validated yet, because that way you have control over how much subdivision is happening here based on the project that you're going to be working on. So you don't necessarily need something this dense to start off with. So just something you want to keep in mind. So I usually just delete the sphere and I import my own new sphere. Okay, so with that being said, I'm just going to open up these three little dots here and move the subdivision at about, I guess we'll leave it at 4 for the purpose of this video. I'm going to close that and I'm going to hit validate. I'm also going to turn off wireframe so we could just look at our big ball of clay. And now looking at this right side toolbox, this is where all of your brushes are. And that's honestly basically all you'll need for sculpting. Okay, so you have your clay brush, which is going to add clay to your mesh. Now, as you can see, this looks very pixelated, and it really just means that the amount of squares that we have in our mesh is low, and therefore it's going to look pixelated. Now, the more that we add, if we go into the next tab, so following our scene tab, we're going to see this funky little polygon guy, and that's going to pull up the menu that's specific to the mesh. So the mesh settings, if you will, you have multi-res, which is the resolution. So if you bring it all the way down, you'll see that this sphere really just is a cube at some point. And then the more divisions you add to it, the more smooth it becomes. So if I subdivide it again, I'm going to have more polygons in my shape, which is going to allow me to have a much smoother result. Now, you don't want to get too crazy with this, because overall it's just going to slow down your workflow if you have too much going on. You only want to up this when you're getting into the nitty-gritty details where you just need more topology. But to start off with, you don't really need to do the most. But that is the clay tool. And then the brush tool is very similar to the clay tool. I would say it's just a little bit more intense. Over here, you actually have your intensity settings as well as the radius for each of the brushes. And again, so this is just kind of, you know, this one's a little bit softer, and then this brush is a lot more, it's also round, but that's not necessarily relevant to the brush, because each brush does have a little brush settings. And, you know, again, it starts to get a little bit more technical, but you are able to change the shape of the brush. So that's not really brush specific, but this is the default brush. You also have your move tool, which does exactly what it sounds like. It just kind of moves your topology around. And then all of these right now, I actually have my symmetry on, as you can see. And by default, it's just going to use our X plane for the symmetry. So that's good for us. And again, I'm looking at this up here in the symmetry settings. So Same way that I clicked it here, I can enable it from up here. I could also change which direction I want my symmetry to behave. I could turn all of them on actually and have it be symmetrical on each of my planes. I could also switch the symmetry from world space to local. So that basically all that means is if I were to move my shape away from the middle of the scene, then, you know, symmetry is going to act a little bit weird because I'm no longer over there. But if I switch this to local, it's going to now just work based off my actual mesh. Let's undo, bring it back. Okay, and then the drag tool is another one that you will probably use a lot. Similar to the move tool, except that the drag tool is going to add more topology as it moves your mesh, whereas the move tool is going to just stretch out the existing squares in your mesh. The drag tool is going to do it a little bit more organized, and it's going to help by adding some polygons there for you. So you're able to do more exaggerated things with the drag tool than with the move tool. The move tool, I consider it more for tweaking, where the drag tool is if I want to actually create a piece of geometry. And then down here we have our mask tool, which is the same as the one from over here. So this is just kind of a shortcut on this side, but we can mask out a part of our object. Again, we could double tap to invert, and then that's just going to protect everything that is not masked out can be tweaked. I can tap again. Hello. Oh, I have to be in mask tool. So I'm in the move brush. I'll go mask, tap to invert, and go back to the move tool. And now I could just kind of tweak stuff around. And then again, if I want to clear it, go back to my mask, hit the little mask icon up here and just clear that. Below that, we have a selection mask. So this is the same. The only difference is that this is a brush. The selection mask is exactly what it sounds like. It will select. So over here, our settings changed a little bit. So you have a lasso tool option, which will just be that. Or if you want to select something more without having to paint on, you could just use the lasso tool. You also have a polygon tool, which will allow you to draw, you know, a polygon. And then just when you hit the little green dot, you're going to select everything that's inside of that polygon. You have a line tool, which will create a straight line across. I should probably clear this so you can see what I'm talking about. And it'll just kind of create a line through. You have a rectangle tool, which same thing. And again, you could also invert that. You have an ellipse tool, which will behave like a circle. And that's pretty much it for that selection mask. Let me clear. Okay, and then underneath that selection mask, we have a smooth brush, which again we have a shortcut for that over here, but it's the same thing. And what we do, I'm going to turn wireframe off, is it does exactly what it sounds like. It just kind of smooths your mesh down. And you can mess with the intensity here if you don't want it to be as harsh. It also behaves based off pressure. So if you press, you know, the harder you press, the more intense that smoothing is. But if we're just kind of gentle, and then pretty much it. And so as you can see that I'm kind of rotating my canvas with the pencil tool by mistake when I'm just trying to smooth out some of these edges. So I actually, if I go up here to where this little hand icon is, this will pull up my gestures and interface settings. And under gestures, here where we see the camera settings, I'm going to turn off stylus by just clicking it. So now that it's white, it's just going to mean that my canvas is no longer going to move with my stylus. I will have to use my finger to move it. And that's just a personal preference, but I find it really annoying if I'm trying to like smooth stuff and it's like rotating. So again, that's just personal preference, but it's cool because you do have a lot of these settings. Same thing with finger. If you want to sculpt with your finger, you can turn that on. if you want to be able to move your gizmo with any of these tools, mouse, stylus, finger. I've never tried a mouse before, but yeah, so you probably want to look at some of these settings. This is also how I made my interface pink, because your default is probably this Nomad, and I think it's this one up here, the mulberry, the one I have on, or I might have just customized it, I don't know, but you have a lot of interesting settings here that you could look at. Okay, and then underneath the smooth tool we have a smudge tool. I honestly don't use this anymore, but this can be useful when you're painting, and then you want to kind of soften or smooth out some of those, like blend your painting out. You could use the smudge tool, and then the paint tool is right underneath that. And with the paint tool, we're gonna come over here to our left hand menu, and you see this sphere here. And this is where your color settings are, and you can just pick a color. You also have a roughness value, which is pretty neat. Same thing with the metalness, which is also really awesome. And you can either hit paint all to just flood the mesh with paint, or we can paint directly on it. And so let's try our smudge tool here. It's a little bit rough, honestly. Like I said, I don't use the smudge tool a whole lot. It's just kind of funky. And this also, another thing to keep in mind is the paint tool. This is vertex painting, which means that it's painting on the vertices. And if you remember anything from geometry class back in like high school, the vertices are the points. So every point on this mesh is what's being painted on. So this is why you're going to see these rough edges. And the only way to avoid that is really to have a more dense mesh. So if I subdivide this again, you'll see it starts to look a lot better. But again, just, you know, be careful with that, because you don't want to have an obnoxious amount of geometry that's may not be necessary. Okay, so that's the paint tool. I believe I downloaded this from online, the smooth color, which helps smooth out some of these edges. I actually think this is from Dave Reed, which is a really awesome, he has an awesome channel here on YouTube with a lot of awesome Nomad tutorials as well, so definitely check him out. And then we have the flatten tool right underneath, which does exactly what it sounds like. It's going to flatten our mesh. So this is also very useful if you want to create a flatter edge. We have a planer tool, which is a little bit more dramatic of a tool, but this is really cool for creating like rocks. I don't know, I would recommend that you play with all of these brushes and kind of see what you could do with it. And then we have the layer tool. This one's also really cool. This one will just build on top. So each layer that you lift your stylus up, it's going to do exactly that. It's going to continue to layer over. It's kind of funky, but I think it could definitely be useful, especially at a smaller radius. Like you can make some really neat, intricate shapes. Then we have our crease tool, which is going to create a crease on our mesh. So like pretty much carve into it. And then one thing I haven't mentioned is that with each tool, you actually have the option to subtract that tool. And what that means, it's going to do the opposite. So instead of carving, if I select subtract, it's going to now rise up above our mesh. And again, that's the same for any of these. So if I go back to my brush tool and I hit subtract, it's going to carve into it instead of the default, which is to build on top. Okay, so that's a crease tool. And then down here we have some of our trim, cut, split tools, which do exactly what that sounds like as well. So you have your lasso trim. So what that's going to do is it's going to trim the shape. And because I have symmetry on, it's going to do it to both sides. You have the option to trim same way, lasso, polygon line, rectangular, or ellipse. Okay, your split tool is going to split the mesh. So if we use our line tool and I just kind of create a line across, you'll notice that when I tap it, I now have split the mesh quite literally into two different parts. And each of these also has their own little settings here. All right, and then The tube tool here, which is probably another tool you'll be using a lot, and one of my personal favorite tools it's a tube tool. And you have options here to create a curve, which really is just you drawing, and then path is you're going to create a path, and then you're going to adjust set path, and then hit the green one to validate, or not validate, but to bring it to life, if you will. So the tube tool is really useful for so many, you have so many possibilities with this tool. What I love about it is that it's got so many settings. So you could do it closed, which will create a fully closed shape, like a continuous shape. You can create a hole in it, which, let me see, I guess because it's closed you can't really see it, but like this. So you can make it a hollowed out kind of pipe. You can also have a radius on one of the ends, on the front and the end, or on every single node, which again is also very useful. And you could do the same thing with twist. Okay, so for the twist tool, it's kind of hard to tell when it's in just a tube, but if we switch over to profile, what it's going to do is it's going to, instead of making this a round cylinder, we're going to now have like a square shaped. And then now we can really see the twist tool come into play. And similar to the radius, the twist tool will allow you to have a twist on each one of your nodes, or you can just have a single twist to just kind of help you rotate it accordingly. Or if you want to do some sort of like braiding or wire, you can have it on both ends. And then over here you can kind of control what that profile looks like. This is a little bit more just honestly playing with it, but this will bring that shape of that square down. We could do it the opposite and then have like a thinner that direction. But yeah, there's a lot of tools in each tool has its own settings, and I would recommend that you just kind of explore and play with it. That's really honestly my best advice. We also have an inflate tool, which is going to inflate. So notice that when I click on one of these tubes, nothing really happens in terms of inflating, and that is because this is not validated. So again, you can't sculpt on anything unless it's validated first. So I'm going to validate that. So what that means is that now I lost all of those settings. Now this is a regular mesh. So if I go back down to my inflate tool, I should be able to use it. So it does exactly what it sounds like. It will just kind of inflate a general area. You can also subtract, and it'll just kind of shrink it into itself, deflate, if you will. This that you're seeing, that's no longer white. It's like this, I guess, peach green, not green, yellow, orangey color. Means that we pretty much broke our mesh, and now we're looking at the inside of it, and we don't want that. So anytime you have that, you want to make sure you correct it. I'm just using the smooth tool to kind of bring some of that back. The pinch tool I also don't really use a whole lot of, but it's going to pinch an area. I mean, that's honestly what it's doing. It's kind of pinching everything together in that area. So it could be useful, but I don't really use it a whole lot. And then everything else, quite frankly, I would suggest that you play with. You have stamp tool, which will create a stamp of something on your mesh, and each of these brushes is going to have settings up here, as I mentioned before, and on this little square is where you'll have the stroke settings. And again, I don't really mess a whole lot with this. The alpha is probably one of the most useful ones, specifically for the stamp tool. Right now it's using this square as its brush, but you can actually import from photos or from files any black and white image to create a specific brush. So I have a couple in here that I use, and then I can just drag to add it onto the mesh. Now, again, you have to be aware that the reason it looks so pixelated is because there's not enough geometry for this to kind of read what's going on. And even here, by subdividing that twice, we still don't have enough. I'm going to subdivide it by 4 times. Let's do it again. And then once again, go down to the stamp and do one of these. See? And so that's much better. And then I'm going to gently smooth that. Now we have a little stamp. So that's a pretty cool tool that we can use. And again, all of the brushes allow you to change the alpha. So I would advise that you have some fun with that. If you use any other digital app like Procreate or Photoshop even, you can create your own black and white images and use them as brushes for Procreate. So that's pretty neat. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this monstrosity that we have created. I'm going to just kind of reset our view and add a sphere. Looking back up here into our left side menu, again, this is your scene menu, and in the scene menu, you not only have your primitive shapes that you can add into your scene, but you also have cameras that you can add in. And all that's going to do is going to create a new viewpoint for you. Like, let's say you have a very specific view that you like, that you want to keep referencing. You can just hit, adjust your camera and then hit save, and that's going to update that viewpoint. Now up here, you'll see the little camera icon. You're able to just click it to select that viewpoint. So let's say I just kind of move my camera around. I go up here and I click. It's going to always take me back to that view I created. So you don't have to worry about like ruining the camera. The only way it's going to update that viewpoint is if you click save and update the viewpoint. So besides cameras, you can also add groups. Groups are very useful when you have a number of items that, maybe belong to the same family that you just kind of want to keep together. So if I were to add another sphere, you'll see she'll by default go inside of this group. But otherwise, if you wanted to drag it inside the group, all you had to do was press, hold, and drag. Oh, that didn't work. Press, hold, and drag. And you'll see it'll highlight yellow, showing you who is going to be the new parent. So that's, again, really useful because then now they'll all move together. And then below that, you're going to have your repeaters. Your repeaters are just going to create clones of the selected object. So right now I have that sphere selected, and I'm going to create an array. And then right now, if I zoom out, you'll see I have a clone of that specific shape. Now up here are my settings for that array, and it's showing me that on the x-axis I have a count of 2 of them, and the size is approximately 2 something. I honestly don't know what units of measure Nomad uses, but I can adjust that. I can also adjust the amount. So if I want 3 of them, and this will tell me what the size increment is in between each of those. And then I can also add a count on Y and on Z. So that's going to give me the behind. And I could just go real crazy with that. But this is really useful. It's a really cool setting to have. And right now it's making everything underneath it behave according to these settings. So if I were to move this outside of the array, it's no longer going to do that. And if I were to drag one of these under the array, it's going to follow those settings. All right, I'm gonna get rid of that array. And then I'm going to add a curve array. Sorry, a curve repeater. And so the curve repeater is going to repeat those objects along a curve. So it gives you a curve by default that you can go ahead and adjust however you want. And then I'm going to up my count. So now all of my nodes or my objects are going to repeat along that curve. Now the sphere we see here is just that sphere there. Let me kind of do this and put the whole thing under the curve. There we go. So now they're acting all kinds of wonky. There you go. But we have that, and the cool thing is we can even have a radius, so it can go thinner to bigger. We can add more of these to really bring it in, and we can even twist it, although I don't know if the twist is going to do a whole lot. Yeah, barely. But you can do some really interesting things with that. And then another cool thing is if you change your mind and you don't want to do the curve, all you have to do is click on it, and then now you have those other options here. So we have our array option again. Click out of it, switch over to curve. You can switch over to mirror, and mirror is going to duplicate along a mirror. So now they're going to do exactly that, just mirror each other. And you can choose what axes that's doing it on. And you can do multiple axes. And then we have our radial array, and our radial array is going to create repeaters along a radius. So if I up this count, you'll see that it creates a ring. So it's circular. And under here we have our lights. Now I don't usually insert lights from this menu, honestly. I go through here, which is, it's just a different way of doing it, but same thing. You can insert lights here. I'm not going to talk too much about lighting because I feel like that's for a whole nother video. But that's pretty much what you need to know about the scene menu. In here you can add primitives, your repeaters, your cameras if you want to add lighting. Following that menu is all of the tools that are relevant. I did mention that slightly earlier. I'm going to validate that so we could see the menu. But this is going to be your resolution. So if you want to add more subdivision levels to your mesh, you can, and you can also go back. So you can go backwards if you wanted to get a little bit more, I guess, precise on how you're moving the shape. And then you could just kind of move it up, because the more resolution it has, the harder it is to control the mesh. So just keep that in mind. And here you have other kind of options on how your mesh resolution should behave. And again, it gets just a little bit more technical, but I don't want to overwhelm you guys with all of these other extra things. I think that as long as you're aware that here is your multi-resolution menu, I think that's a great starting point. And I love that you're able to not lose anything. Like you could go back and forth, you could delete the lower, you could reverse, you could delete higher. So I think that's very useful. On the next menu here you have your material settings. So right now we are in opaque, which is honestly the default. If you're gonna get a little bit more technical and you want subsurface scattering, you can do that. You have blending modes. If you want to make like glass really reflective materials, even water, you could use the refraction option. So there's a lot, and they have their own settings as well, and I would again suggest that you play with them, but I think it's really cool that Nomad allows for that. Again, here is your lighting menus. So a lot of times you'll see people sculpts and they'll look like this, for example. Right now I have it set to white, but oftentimes I use this orange kind of shade. And the difference is really just that the opaque will give you a fake lighting. And I actually recommend that you do sculpt in matte cap, because it will show you a much more realistic view of what your mesh is going to look like at the end. Now, of course, once you're done sculpting, then you can switch back to lit, and then you can add your lighting and build your scene off of that. But I do recommend that you start in the matte cap, because that way everything is kind of lit equally and you don't have to worry about creating lighting to sculpt. And then that's pretty much it. Outside of that, you have your post-processing settings. Again, this is a little bit more later down the line, so I'm not going to touch on that. If you want to add reference images, this is where you would do it. So in this little image icon, you have the option to add a color background, which you can do here, or an environment, and you'll have the option to click reference image and then simply click here, and then you're able to just bring in anything either from your photos folder or your files. And then you're able to hit transform, and you could move it with your fingers, pinch to scale. You could even rotate and just place it wherever on screen. tap to exit. You could also just use the position to do the same thing. Then it has the ability to bring down the opacity. You could also use overlay, which means that it's going to be in front of your mesh if you wanted to like sculpt something directly, you know, referencing that picture. You could do that. And then you could bring the overlay to send it to the back again. But that's pretty useful. And then when you no longer need it, you could just turn it right off. I guess down here, let's talk a little bit about these guys. If you go into your interface settings, you can actually edit what kind of shortcuts you see at the bottom of your screen. So I have the inspect tool, and this should show you the UVs of your mesh if you have any. And I don't have any, so that's why it doesn't show, but I could go up here into miscellaneous, and I can hit unwrap, and then it's going to create a UV for me. So now when I hit inspect, it's going to show me that UV. So that's pretty much it. Now Nomad does UV, but it does not do the best job at it. So you don't really have control of where it cuts it. It's just kind of, you know, it tries to be smart. It does its best, but just keep that in mind. And then wire is going to give us that wire frame. Now you can see this shape here looks almost completely black, and that's because of how dense it is. And when I click on each shape, you're going to notice that Nomad actually tells me the count, the poly count on each shape. So this one has 6,146 polygons. This one has 642,000. So this is extremely dense. And then it'll also tell me the amount in the scene altogether, and then how much RAM and space it's taking up. So if you wanted to remesh something and bring it down lower, you could use this voxel remesh settings. Voxels are basically the equivalents of pixels, but in a 3D world. So we obviously don't have, you know, pixels in this shape, but we have voxels, which are what makes up that shape. And if I turn down this resolution, you're going to see those cubes tell us how dense our shape is. So based off that, whenever I'm happy with what I think should look like, I'm going to hit remesh. It's going to tell me that my multi-resolution is going to be lost, which means that if I have, you know, anything going on here, that's going to be gone. So I'm going to say, okay, that's fine with me. And now that looks much more, you know, reasonable. Then you also have that shortcut down here. Actually, if I long press it, I can do the same down here. So that's pretty handy. And then I have a mask. This will show me any mask that I currently have active, which I don't have any. So, but it's going to show or hide the mask. That's what that does. Then I also have my grid, which will show me my world space grid. And that way you can see exactly where the floor is, and if you're maybe a little bit confused where your X and Y's are. But I honestly typically keep it off because I have my little cube here to guide me. You also have your perspective mode, so this will either turn perspective on or off. I typically work with perspective off, but that is just personal choice. You also have your solo shortcut, so anything that you click and you clicked on solo, is going to do, you know, it's going to solo it. That way you can simply focus on that shape. This is very useful when you have a bunch of stuff, you know, in your scene. And then lastly, you have your history, which is also really, really awesome that they have this, because if you want to jump back to like an older part, like you messed up and you're like, you know what, no, let me go all the way back. You can kind of find a place you were at, and then you're going to lose all of the future work you did, so just make sure that is what you want to do. But once you click that, we are able to go all the way back. So I think that's pretty awesome that we have that option. Actually, you can still go forward. So let's go back. Yeah, we can. So there, even more awesome. Then this is just your undo and your redo. But yeah, I think that's honestly pretty much it. I think the other important thing is always save. Save your project, and here you can name it. We just call it project 1. You could also turn on auto save if that's something that you feel you should have on. I turned it off, just again personal preference, but it does have the option for auto save, so that's pretty useful. Okay, but that is all for this kind of Nomad introduction interface video. I really hope that it was useful for you guys. If you have any other questions, feel free to leave them down below and I will do my best to answer them for you. I am working on more tutorials coming in the future, so that's exciting. If you guys don't want to miss anything, do not forget to hit that subscribe button. But again, thank you guys so much, and I'll see you guys next time.